Each day has been met with purpose of trying to design a better solution for dietitians, but also now a better design for the actual athletes.
The general public, we do know enough about food and how to eat well, but knowing it doesn't equal doing it.
The nutrition science is absolutely important, but eating is a behaviour, and my knowledge is pretty irrelevant if I can't translate it to people's lives.
Welcome to 40G. Alicia Edge, welcome to the 40G podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Kylie.
Now, last week we touched base just to talk about what we can talk about in this episode, and I think we could have chatted for about 5 hours. So we're not going to struggle about things to talk about today. The hardest part will be keeping it within a time frame. But I'm really looking forward to talking today more about the behaviour around eating as opposed to the science of fueling. So you've obviously done a lot of work with our nation sweetheart, the Tillies, and what you're doing with Compete Performance now. But before we get into the nutritional side of things, I want to know a little bit more about you. What was young Alicia like, and what role did sport play in your life?
Oh, young Alicia was an energetic perfectionist, I would probably summarise her as. An emotional soul that had to perfect everything, to the point where I was a child that had to learn to ride my bike without training wheels by myself, without anyone watching, and only once I could do it could anyone watch. That probably summarises the person that I was and probably still am trying to not be. Mm-hmm. Sport-wise, I was just always really active. That was my happy place. I was never an elite professional athlete of any kind, but I loved moving. So sport for me was running long distance in particular. And I grew up playing hockey. So that was kind of I grew up in a country town. So it was just always outdoorsy, always doing things, a bit of touch footy, but just mostly just any opportunity to hang in team sport was amazing. And now it's my real passion project for my girls to have that same experience. And, even my close friends now, we've all got kids, but my best and closest friends are from sport. So it is a pretty magical thing. So yeah, sport was just always a crucial part of who I was, and also what I love spectating and being close to and connected to. My family was very much a rugby league family of the St. George supporter dad, which I think a lot of people in New South Wales could vibe with. Yeah, we didn't have many wins. My brother was Newcastle Knights, so again, not many wins. Yep. But yeah, that's really that's the family memories alongside sport, which I think we can all connect with, and all the family friends would come around for State of Origin. And yeah, it was just very much country New South Wales, I think, is where that love of sport has come from. And career-wise, it's probably what has generally led me to sports nutrition. But I only ever studied nutrition because I loved food. And I remember so vividly, going to the uni, and Dad's I don't know what I really didn't know what I knew. I wanted to do something in health. I just loved, that part of the well-being side and helping. And I remember Dad picked up a brochure. It was so cliche. It was a lady in a clinic holding an apple and banana. And it was you could do that. You love food. I was I do love food. And I ended up there. I think I had physio first, OT second. I wasn't smart enough for either of those. Got into nutrition, and I haven't looked back. So yeah. I love sport because it's so purposeful and performance-based in whatever definition that person chooses to define as performance for them. And yeah, I haven't looked back since I kind of started and kind of launched into that sporting sphere a lot of years ago now.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the career of a sports dietitian. What do you do on a day-to-day basis, and what are some of the positions and roles you've had up until this date?
Yeah, the roles in sports nutrition are diverse. I would have to say tricky in many ways to get an in sport, particularly at the professional performance level in Australia, because it's such a small, close-knit, not many job prospects, right? And a lot of the time we'd be job sharing with maybe some private practice work or clinic work, and then having to do sports on the side as more of the passion project. that has shifted and changed over the years. And I feel like we are now at a rebuild phase after COVID kind of then cleared us out again. And now we've rebuilt and found positions. My career in sport kind of started just playing around with like endurance and working with, I was doing triathlon and Ironman at the time. And so that kind of just gravitated me towards those who I was training with and questions. And so I started in triathlon nutrition and did the sports nutrition course. So for those playing at home, if this is a career that you're interested in, you have to do nutrition and dietetics first, and then you need to do another accreditation on top of that from Sports Dietitians Australia, and that becomes then you're an accredited sports dietitian. And so, yeah, started in triathlon, and then I went for a fellowship at Australian Institute of Sport 3 years in a row. So I just kept trying.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, I didn't succeed the first time. I got some feedback of what I needed to do differently. The second time I got to the top 2 and was flown there for an interview, missed out, got some more feedback, listened. And then the next year I was like, oh, I'm pretty good. Like I was comfortable. I was like doing Ironman training. I was happy in the role I was in. And I get this call and they're like, are you applying this year? I was like, no, I'm pretty good. And
Not interested.
I rang my now husband, who's like, you just got a call from the AIS telling you to apply. Like, you should probably just do that. And I was like, yeah, okay. So
I'm flipping this
really
script this
quickly.
time. Yeah. I'm going to have the power.
Yeah, I'll tell them if I'm going.
Yeah.
And I was really fortunate to get a fellowship position, which is 2 years and quite a low wage, but just a really launch into the career. Like, you're next door to some of the absolute incredible mentors in sports nutrition. And so that was 2013, 2014. Then I was given a position in a maternity field, and then I myself fell pregnant and decided to move closer to home. So from 2015, we've kind of been making our own path and designing what sports nutrition in a day looks like, because I really saw very early on that it wasn't a very family-friendly career path.
Right. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with Compete Performance.
Yeah, well, originally it was probably a selfish, in many ways, kind of like a project. I had a newborn. I was ready to re-enter the workforce, and at that time I was in a really small little town called Foster, which is close to my hometown of Taree, and I couldn't find any elite athletes there, or not many anyway. It wasn't going to be a booming career path from the AIS. And my husband was like, well, what does career look like for you? Because we've just kind of designed our lives for, you know, we've been in Canberra for 3 years. It was a lot to do that, but also how amazing for you to now launch up. How do you not have a career path in sports nutrition? And it's a real issue in our profession where we kind of hit our top very quickly, but also it's very tricky once we've got a family. And he wasn't going to have it. He's like, that is just so unfair. I'm not okay with it. And he was like, no, we're going to fix this. Yeah. And so I remember him sitting down and we had this chat, and he's like, if we do this differently and go the tech path to have more of an online coaching design, you're probably not going to get paid for at least 2 years. And I was like, oh, babe, that's not true. And he was correct. He was absolutely correct. So it was a really big risk, in many ways, financially and mentally and emotionally for us, but also a calculated one where we had to gamble and bet on ourselves a little bit. And it has been a really hard path, if I'm honest. We have absolutely chosen the hardest path in tech design and tech startup land, but also each day has been met with purpose of trying to design a better solution for dietitians, but also now a better design for the actual athletes and clients that we work with. Because one piece that we kind of like were unraveling along the way of this path of building a business was like, I could absolutely just get meal plans out. That's fine. Like, the science of food is there. You can calculate it. You can prescribe it. But we had this churn. And I was like, we're missing something. Like, we're missing a whole point here where it isn't actually about the numbers. And so I had to do a whole lot of unlearning. It was pretty vulnerable, I must admit, to really work through maybe the harm I'd done in the past, maybe the things that I hadn't done well. And we started to really design based around acknowledging that, yes, the nutrition science is absolutely important, but eating is a behavior. And my knowledge is pretty irrelevant if I can't translate it to people's lives. And that's where we now are in a coaching-based membership style where we've got dietitians all around Australia that we pair with our clients as they come through our app, and it's pretty unreal. And so we've got an internal team that work with our bigger clients like Football Australia, as you mentioned, and then an external team that contract with us to the individual clients that we work with as well.
Brilliant. So if you're an athlete, you just sign up to the app and you just get advice from a dietetics perspective?
Yeah, so the main bit that we wanted to do differently was how we onboard our athletes, because, and also just active individuals. I want to be clear that, like, for us, an athlete means someone who just would like to perform, and performance is really relative on how you'd like to define that. And the onboarding for us is not spending too much time even caring about what they eat, but really digging into the why of what is going to be their enablers to success in changing the way they eat or achieving their success in nutrition, versus the barriers that are currently getting in their way. And that's where a dietitian, hopefully future-wise, I think a lot of the time in health, the health professional sits at the top and tells someone what to do, and it's really hierarchical. We try and what we have done is moved it more to a partnership style where our athletes and our clients are the experts in their life, and we're the experts in food, but it's our role together to come up with a plan of what actually works and what suits in their life and what they're currently going through and what is possible, and something that makes sense to them. So yeah, it's a work in progress forever, which I love, and it's probably part of the project passion that we've got. But yeah, we're really proud of what we're building.
It's a fantastic idea, because you even think yourself, like, it's quite hard if you're a professional athlete or just a general person who's active to find time to go to a dietitian. It's expensive. And a lot of the time you go, you get told information, but again, it doesn't change your behaviors. And you sort of need someone almost for accountability and checking in just to see how you're going. And as you say, alter that behavior, because the general public, we do know enough about food and how to eat well, but knowing it doesn't equal doing it. So it's really that behavior change behind it, which is where the power is.
Yeah, and I think the real tricky piece of that, of going, I know this stuff, why the heck aren't I doing it, is what also creates that guilt and shame and frustration that so many of us have when it comes to nutrition. And I remember, like, this is pre-social media, so forgive me, but I really have this clear memory of, like, when people know better, they'll do better. Like,
Yeah.
they just need more education. Turns out nutrition information was not the missing link. Like,
Yes.
we have got enough nutrition information. Like, and I always got to give that example of, like, no one falls off their chair if I tell them that they probably need to drink more water. Like, it's not like, oh my God, I have not heard this before. Or veggies are important. It's like, wow.
Oh, groundbreaking stuff.
It's more like, you need to drink more water. What's getting in your way right now of doing that? And that's where the magic happens, of when we really work through the root cause to then move it into a behavior. And it's the same with veggies, right? Like, how often do you just say, well, you just need to eat more veggies, or I need to eat more veggies, or I should be eating this? And it's like, well, first of all, like, what's stopping you? Is it access? Is it ability to cook? Do you like vegetables? Like, we probably need to come back to the basics to then enable the behavior. And so if we really focus, on, like, making it more enjoyable, making it easier, and, something that's really obvious in their day, then it actually just makes sense. So yeah, that's a really big step of moving back and then going forward with it with a whole lot more compassion and a whole lot more flexibility and scalability, for sure, because there is no perfect in nutrition, that's for sure.
Now, selfishly, before we go on with behavior around eating, I want to know more about your role as the dietitian for the Matildas, which, in case anyone has been living under a rock, the Matildas they created the Matildas Effect, which was the term coined to describe the tangible increase in interest, in participation across all different sports within women's sports from the 2023 FIFA World Cup. So I would love to know, from your perspective, A, how did you end up landing a job there? B, what a day in your life looks like when you're working with them, especially when they're traveling. And C, what role did nutrition play in their success?
So many great things there. So I started with Matildas in 2019, and I still think about that moment. I don't think I realized how big it was. I was so grateful and so excited, but also so terrified of this role, because it just meant so much. But at the same time, I didn't have the individual knowledge of all the players yet, right? Like, And as I got to know them, I was like, wow, these girls are incredible. They're so intelligent. They're so professional. And I just got to hear so much of their story and their background and how much they'd gone through to get to where they were. Because in 2019, they weren't a big name. And also people had asked me what I did for a job, and I'd kind of have to sell it to them of how cool my job was. Like,
Yeah.
no, guys, like these girls are amazing. But after 2023, it really didn't become that. Like, it was definitely a selling point of me being able to say, no, I'm really proud to be the Matildas dietitian. I have been for a long time, but now you understand how cool my job
How
is.
cool we are. Yeah.
Yeah. And even right before the World Cup, Kylie, like, people would be like, oh, how's work going? I was like, oh, it's a lot. Like, there's a lot going on, a lot of planning. You know, we've got the World Cup coming up. And like, oh, really? Like, where's that? And I'm like, here. Like,
Right here.
it's in this country, guys. And I was panicking. I was like, Australia's going to stuff this up. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to have empty stadiums. No one's going to pay attention. Like, it's going to be really embarrassing. But like, after that first game, wow, didn't everyone show up and like realize that women's football is different and different in a great way, and we don't have to be the same as men's football, and there's just so much incredible viewing. I think the really big thing that I love, though, is people fell in love with the people behind the player.
Yes.
And not just the football. So yeah, it's pretty magical. And yeah, I'm very grateful for the small role that I get to play in their lives and also their careers.
I'm sure they would argue you played a bigger than a small role. How was their diet culture when you first got there as opposed to how it is now?
Yeah, I think in sport in general, I don't think this is a football like specific challenge that I had, but I think in football in general, there's this real push for leanness or smallness as better, or lighter is better. And we see that in all codes, particularly in team sports. And I think I still remember being quite shocked when that came about, because as I was starting in female football, my career started in men's sport. I think that probably doesn't shock anyone. That's where generally we all started. And I was really excited to work with these female players. You know, body composition didn't seem to be a really critical piece of performance for something like a team sport. I was just excited for that strength and that power and all that focus of performance. But I think what has been overemphasized over the years in many arenas of like individual sports all the way through to teams is how important body composition or weight is to performance. And that really does interact with someone's relationship with food, their ability to both be available both mentally and also physically. And it was a really big unpacking. So the really key part of how we started to work with Matildas is I was fortunate to work with the Centre of Excellence when it was a thing at AIS in the football program for the men's, which is under 17s. What a time. That was so much fun. But the connections I made there then grew to us working on a solution for the Football Australia pathway, not just Matildas, of how are we going to shift this needle towards the performance lens, but also enabling performance through wellbeing. And so we had a really beautiful opportunity for a longer period of time to set the foundations of what we felt were foundations to food and intake for performance, which aren't, your carbohydrates, your proteins. It's actually the things that we've already mentioned, things like relationship with food, being able to cook and shop and have a really steady like confidence in body. And that then enables the science to just happen, because there's, an ability to do that and the capacity to do that. So we worked with future Matildas a lot and really entrenched in there. And I think the really nice thing of seeing that now is so many of those future Matildas that we started with in 2019, 2020 and now in the Matildas. And it's really been a really long path and a long game. And I reflect a lot because that's kind of rare in sport to get the opportunity to play the long game. And I feel really grateful for that, of now seeing where these girls are having the ability to focus on the performance rather than what they look like or what they weigh.
And what do you do day to day? Like, does each of those female athletes, do they have their own individualized diet program?
Only when needed. So the way that we work is very much around what does that player need to arrive in a state of best performance when it comes into camp. So for those like who haven't been around football and like soccer, there's FIFA windows. So over the year, you have set windows where national teams get released from their club and they get to come into national team camps which you might see in your different cities around Australia or the world. But also alongside that, there's tournaments within that. It might be World Cup, Olympics, Asian Cup next year, home, which is very exciting. And so our role is like, how do I ensure that they're ready for when they come into camp? So there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes when they're in club. So I'll work alongside their team nutritionists in their club environment, but also individually with them. And then in their camp, so once we're in and we've traveled, it's about setting their environment up for success. So once they're in camp, the load and also the match day is quite quick. But, we've got 10 to 12 days with these players a lot of the time. So how do we get them fed, recovered from jet lag? How do we get them ready for match day? And we are very fortunate to always travel with a team chef. And we have an incredible sports science team and medical team to support with all these things as well. So on the ground, once we're in camp, it's very much like any fires that need to be put out, we will, but also the environment is going to enable all the behaviours that we need. And then outside of camp, it's more that slower, like education, behaviour change, and support piece to enable all that to happen once they're in camp.
And have you noticed since when you started there that it has increased exponentially, their knowledge, their proactivity around food? And I guess the difference between probably when you came in, there was a more of an emphasis around body composition as opposed to performance. Is that slowly shifting?
Yeah, I feel like that's probably been the nicest piece of where, because often when you're in a role, you don't necessarily reflect all the way back to enough, maybe. And I think celebrating how far that has come to, safety in the meal room, in their locations, is really, really nice. The other piece, I think, to this is how much time I spend, for someone who's studied for a long time, so much of my role is just giving permission to eat. And permission to fuel, because the other piece to working with professional athletes that are in the media lens, and they've got a lot of images and videos happening. They've got a lot of time on screens. And so I think the really big thing there is like the comparison that happens to that, the body awareness, and it just shifts in terms of like acknowledging that I don't think we'll ever prevent, anything around like that disordered eating or some body image complexities, but I think we can get to a point where we're preventing eating disorder to the clinical sense. And the reason I say that is that when we are thinking about our relationship with food and body, it's something that sits on a continuum. It's actually really normal for that to shift and change depending on what someone is going through. So if you think about different transitions in our lives, maybe we move to a different club or a different location, maybe we have a breakdown in relationship or get injured. There's lots of different things that can shift our time in that moment. And one of the things that can shift as a result of that is our relationship with food and body, to maybe try and gain some control back, or because it kind of threatens our permission to eat, if you like. So say we're injured. If you've only ever eaten for your sport and you only see food as a fuel for your sport, and we take that sport away, where is your permission coming from to fuel, to eat? And that earning to deserve food becomes very loud. So there's lots of different things there, I think, in culture and environment and the way we talk internally and externally around food that can impact that. But that's a really key part of my role, is just acknowledging that that can change at any point in time. And it's not, okay, I've done the work, fantastic, that's off. It's like, no, I need to be really aware of all these changes, but the players also need to be empowered and aware of these changes, normalize these conversations to enable that to move through to normalized, optimized eating quicker than if we just wait for it to become, more serious or more of a clinical concern.
Yeah, and I've heard you speak about the triangle when it comes to nutrition. So one side of it being health, one side of it being performance, and the other side being body composition. Now, you can't focus on all three really at once, can you? So it's sort of where you're at in your life, what season you're at with your sport, and how you can choose one side of the triangle to be your primary focus. Can you explain a little bit more about that triangle?
Yeah, I think that what I wanted to do with that imagery is appreciate that sometimes we can aim for one thing, but it comes at the cost of actually what we may have been aiming for in the meantime. So say if you only have the goal of body composition, let's use bodybuilding as an example, or like the physique competition. At this time that they walk on stage for that set body composition, they are probably the unhealthiest and least likely to perform than ever because they are dehydrated, they're underfueled, they are very, very flat. However, body composition wise, nailed it. Now, in, say, a performance setting, say it's a team sport or an individual sport, there are set periods in time where you might aim for a certain body composition to perform. Maybe it's a weight making sport, or maybe there's a really small or acute benefit to changing weight to perform. Then you might come at the cost a little bit of your performance, but it also might come at the cost of your health as well. And so if you move to shift to one side, you may actually lose out. The other example to that is sometimes we pull out numbers as athletes and we're like, well, if I just lost 2 kilos, or if I just look like that, or if I just get back to the weight that I was last year, I'll perform again. And all of a sudden that outcome goal becomes all we're looking for. And we can absolutely lose weight, right? Like we can find that energy deficit, we can restrict, and we can change weight to where we think we need to be. But what if that comes at the cost of your overall well-being, your relationship with food, your ability to connect and have like that cultural connection piece? But also, what if it comes at the cost of your power, your speed, your recovery? And so what we really urge all our athletes to do is ensure that, yes, you can absolutely hold a body composition goal. And it's not about invalidating that, but it's ensuring that it's not the one measure we're using for success. So if we're looking to change body composition, it's appreciating that body composition is actually a symptom. It's not a behavior. Like we're not going to, okay, I need to do some losing weight. And it's like, no, what are you going to do to do that? There's all those behaviors underneath. So a beautiful paper that was written by the International Olympic Committee in 2023 summarized where we're sitting with body composition, and also really looked at all the papers we had in all the sports to find out if there was a causative relationship between body composition and performance. But what really became, it was really good. I'll definitely send it to you. So what came about from that paper, though, was we have a lot of correlative data. What that means is that when people are performing at this level, their body composition is this. But it's not they are performing at this level because their body composition is this. The one thing that really came about was a paper in cycling, and it was showing improved performance based around lean mass, muscle mass. Makes sense, power, right? But I think so much, even in the cycling sphere or the individual sports sphere, is we get lots of focused conversation on like power to weight, and then it all goes to, well, let's just reduce our weight. But what if that then reduces our power? And so that ratio actually loses out. So I think when we're looking at body composition, there has historically been an overemphasis of what we see as professional, what we see as what someone should look like if they're a professional athlete, or what they should look like to be a footballer or a runner, and all those types of assumptions that I think we're often fighting against. So I think that's like really when we're looking at body composition, appreciating that we don't have a set number that someone needs for performance. We can appreciate that body composition may influence performance, but we need to have different markers of success that are more performance centered and well-being centered, rather than just focusing on that number or allowing that number to define you. Because if we think about when we jump on scales, for example, there's so many things that impact that number. And there's so many things that influence that number that are out of our control. And the definition of anxiety is trying to control something that is out of your control. And so if we all of a sudden have an environment or a culture that puts a lot of emphasis on that and tells you that you need to lose weight, but doesn't offer the support around that to help you achieve that, where are you going to go? What behaviors are you going to do to achieve that at all costs? And that's where we see that restriction, that anxiety, that guilt, that shame really appear from food, but also around body as well.
It's really interesting. At the time of recording this, we've just had the Women's Rugby World Cup. And I was reading an article the other day talking about the different nutritional needs just within the team, right? So you've got your props who are big, strong, they need more fuel. And you've got your sort of backs who are sort of more lean, athletic, right? It goes to show that you don't have to look the same way even within a certain sport to perform. Each role has different tasks that needs to be done, different body movements and body systems to complete those tasks to the greatest of your ability. And you even look at, Ilona Ma, who's an absolute trailblazer in this space, who I absolutely love. And she's doing so much to change the narrative around that you need to be skinny and lean to be athletic. It really just depends on what your sport is. But if your body can achieve it, it is athletic. You don't need to look a certain way aesthetically to be deemed athletic.
Yeah, and gosh, Alona, what has she
Yeah,
done?
what a
It's
star.
amazing. Like, every time she talks, I was like, "How does she do that?" She's
Yeah.
amazing. Like, when you talk influence and impact, like, I don't think you can measure what she has achieved in such a short amount of time in this space. And I think it comes down to also that we need to hold that conversation of when we're looking at, say, what someone looks like, we cannot predict performance outcome or potential because there's, the genetic component to that, first of all, but also we need to consider, and this is where the IOC paper defined it so beautifully, is that it doesn't look like there's a really clear causative relationship between body composition and performance. Body composition is simply a symptom of maturity and training, the habits they're doing between recovery, training load, and also their nutrition. So if we're instead going, maybe I perceive that this person needs to be fitter or faster or stronger, the outcome might be changes in body composition. But what we should actually be focusing on is what behaviors does this person need to do or myself need to do to become faster, fitter, and stronger, because it's actually not about body composition. It's about what's going to support that outcome or, identity goal. If you're thinking about, I want to be higher in energy, I want to be someone who shows up with, more joy or more presence. And if you focus on that identity piece, it allows you to not move away from actually who you want to be just because of what number you might think you need to be. So yeah, it's a big conversation. We hold lots of deep conversations for dietitians, I think, because there is so much psychology attached to food.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that coaches and selectors and those who are of this sort of outdated model, they dismiss a lot of athletes just by looking at them and saying, well, they need to lose weight, they're not athletic. So yeah, I've known that, myself and some of my friends, and they haven't gotten into teams because of essentially how they look, but athletically they can do their job and they do it bloody well. So it's a matter of shifting this narrative and just there is evidence, I assume, that, it does play a role, but it's not the primary role.
Yeah, like for example, my body composition might be considered highly performance advantage, but like a high performance advantage if I was to measure it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to head out on the pitch with Matildas. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't get to actually allow me to play. So there's so much technical, but also mental ability to make decisions, focus. And so if we instead like really center everything we do around it, like, how do we make someone more physically available? And that's not just in sport. Like physically available means that you are able to perform well with, low injury, low illness, mentally available. So you're focused, you're making decisions, you're present, your mood is steady, but also for a long time. And I think that's the really key piece, that sometimes we're after a performance outcome for the players, that we forget are people, but we forget that this is actually a career that we want that investment in that asset for a long period of time. So there's the longevity piece in that too. So I often go into conversations with players, but also definitely with coaches and key stakeholders in the performance side, going, what actually matters to this person that I'm speaking to? What's going to be their main driver of success? Because, for a coach, they might not care that a player, has recovered from disordered eating, but they might care that they're now able to have a clearer space for thought, concentration. They might now be fueling better to be able to, not lose intensity in that second half. There's so many things there of like, that's more important to them. And that's what I need to now sell in the nutrition space to be able to enable an environment that is safer, with more permission to fuel and fuel for performance. And I think that, you mentioned, what someone looks like and that perception, but what we're often, this is in the men's space as well, I must say, the perception that a certain body looks unprofessional or lazy. Um, and there's a lot of assumptions on someone's actions based around what they look like. And that is so unfair, but it's also so societal in the way that it's going to take a really long time to turn that around. And so when I'm talking to coaches, support staff, it's really inviting vulnerability in reflection rather than telling them don't do that. It's like, have you ever done that? Why is that? Where do you think that comes from? So they can then start to challenge those thoughts and assumptions and beliefs, so that we can then move forward to a space where bodies don't get to define value. They don't get to define potential. They can be something that we can adapt over time, but the biggest shift is no one asks why. Do you know what I mean? Like, they all just have that surface value. And my experience is sometimes those who are struggling the most with body composition or pressure around weight actually care way more than anyone else. And it's not unprofessional. They are trying to be so professional, but the pressure and the guilt and the shame that is attached to their bodies is then interrupting and creating so much maladaptive behavior and disordered behavior around food. So I think this is like where disordered eating is really tricky, because I think in most people's mind, if I say eating disorder, what's first to come? It's like, a white young female skeletal anorexic type disordered eating, and that is one type. But less than 6% of eating disorders are underweight. And if we just sit with that for a second, like, that's a really small amount of those with an eating disorder that are actually presenting as underweight. And so look to eating disorder, there's no look to disordered eating. And if we're thinking about how it might actually come about, that might actually look like really professional. It might look really strict and like, wow, so regimented, and look like it can actually be celebrated. I wish I could have that kind of restriction or that kind of dedication. And they might be really lean, and they might be doing everything that society celebrates. But also disordered eating can look like, that kind of like disorganized, low focus, distracted, difficulty changing their body weight or changes in weight. It can look like having, no control over their food and all those types of things that society tends to say is lazy or disorganized or unprofessional. However, the feeling underneath that is the same. It's still around, trying to find that control. It still feels completely overwhelming. And it's filled with that shame and guilt that can then just cycle through. So I think if we focus less on what someone looks like and more around, hey, let's just hold a whole lot of compassion for every person. Because when we look at the stats of active individuals, the rates of that maladaptive eating, so not eating disorder, but disordered eating in the active population, sits anywhere from 30% to 85%. And the average in a review paper that was found is 55%. So it's actually the majority of people have these challenges with food. So if we show up acknowledging that, and not in a space of fear, but just in a space of acknowledgement and compassion, I think we would actually hold conversations around food and body a whole lot differently.
Yeah. I remember I was speaking to Hayley Campbell earlier on in the podcast, and she was talking about her own disordered eating, and the light bulb went off in my head. I was like, shit, I've had disordered eating. But,
Yeah.
and again, I know all these signs and things, but it only clicked when she said it, because I too had altered the way I've seen food through social media, and, I become consumed with it, and it took up too much space in my head. And if I had a big night out, then I'd feel the next day that I shouldn't be eating as much, and all these types of things. And it was bit of a light bulb moment where it was so blatantly obvious, but I just thought, shit. And then I've had things like stress injuries and things like that, which is obviously could be a reason behind it as well. So I'm sure a lot of the population, if they really thought about it, they would too sit in that boat.
Yeah, and I think that's the really tricky piece, because it just looks so different for each individual. And say, the feeling of needing to earn or burn the food and those types of thoughts can just be so normalized alongside, orthorexic tendencies. Orthorexia is an obsession with healthy eating or clean eating. So it can be a really clear path to accidental underfueling in an athlete, for example, because they might be eating plenty of food in the amounts, but eating so much health food. So it's really low energy dense, but high nutrient dense, and thinking they're doing everything right. But in fact, performance eating can look really different to health eating. So it's about challenging a lot of the societal, labels I think we put on food. And that's both in players and also support staff find that really, really tricky.
Yeah, and I guess like what you were saying earlier is that a lot of athletes are generally have perfectionistic traits and they love to control things. So food is one thing you can control, whereas a lot of the things on the field you might not be able to control. So it's probably are they more at risk to eating disorders, elite athletes or athletes, than just the general population?
Yeah, I think the studies have shown that we do see higher rates, but it isn't to say that these rates aren't high in general population as well. Because if you think about that control piece, as you mentioned, you can't control the outcome of the game. You can't control your selection even. There's a lot of situations now, particularly as women's sports comes up, you can't even control your location or, or if you're going to be, traded to a different club the next day. So there's a lot out of our control. And I think if we just acknowledge that food is just a symptom of that, and it's not necessarily about the nutrients, it's about everything around it, we can appreciate that, what we put on our plate or what we see others with their plate, we actually need to look under the plate a little bit more, and really appreciate that there's a whole story amongst that. And that can also include things like financial capacity, financial food insecurity. A lot of athletes, particularly in Australia, but also overseas, struggle to make ends meet on a lower wage. So we're expecting these players to show up, to perform, to recover really well, but can they actually afford the amount of food or the type of food they need for best performance? And I think a lot of the time we need to challenge that and appreciate that no, not always is their environment set up for success in that way. Also, things like our mood. I think most of us can appreciate if we've got a low mood versus a high mood, we can choose foods or feel food differently around the foods we eat. So it's when we screen a person coming through our doors, it's like these are the questions we're asking. We're really asking them to notice what is going on in their life right now so that we can meet them where they're at when it comes to food. Because if someone's coming through the door and they've got really low capacity, really low curiosity or energy in the kitchen, we're not about to prescribe them this really extravagant, nutrition program that's like, you just need to do this and you'll perform. It's like, no, we need to actually scale that back, appreciate where they are, and really just choose a few key things to work on at one time, build that action, and then go from there. Because one thing I harp on about a fair bit with our athletes and also with our dietitians is this new concept of nutrition resilience. And I think sometimes resilience is seen as a hardness and a firmness and almost that perfectionistic of just get through it. But with nutrition resilience, if we actually look at the definition, it's the ability to act with speed and strength in the moment of adversity. And if we think about that in food, there's so many adversities that we might come across every day. It might be forgetting our lunch or being on the road for longer or, missing a meal due to a meeting. We might have low appetite, or there might be big adversities like moving, getting injured, all these types of things. And how fast and how well can someone act in these moments? And I used to think that the definition of that was well, I just need people to, have options that are really good options. But a psychologist I was working with at the time was no. The magic in that definition, Alicia, is the action bit. So if we can give permission to people to just take action and find their best option in that moment in time, that practice will create that, fast response that doesn't sit on their mind for ages. And I think a lot of people who have gone through disordered eating can appreciate how long sometimes food decisions can sit on their
Mm,
conscience.
mm,
And so really that's what we're aiming for, is that resilience of flexibility, ability to eat socially, make spontaneous decisions, and appreciate that it doesn't get to define you. Our food decisions are sometimes the best ones are a takeaway through drive-through, and another time it might be a really incredible home-cooked meal. But there's no right or wrong. There's no morality in that. It's just what is my best option in this moment in time.
mm. And I think it's interesting in this day and age when we've got social media. Arguably, we have more information at our fingertips than ever before, but it almost causes this analysis paralysis. And me personally, I look at these, influencers, and this is a day in my life, and they're cooking these incredible 5-star meals for every single meal. And it almost puts this pressure on you that that is what healthy looks like. That is how I should be meal prepping. But as athletes, we don't have time. We often don't have money, especially if you're a female athlete. We don't have the resources and things like that. So how can we create more realistic expectations and more realistic game plans around turning up and cooking meals that are still healthy, but they mightn't look like the 5-star gourmet version that an influencer's posting?
Yeah, Carly, I often ponder on needing to release a Sandwich Press cookbook.
Well, I'll buy it because I bloody love
Oh,
a
hey,
sandwich.
honestly. So, for me, it's been a personal experience of letting go. And I still find myself making comments of what I used to do. And I even get teary now. I'm very busy with work and company. Working in sport is also brutal, and I'm doing really long hours because I'm working in UK time zone and Australian time zone, and I've got 3 kids, and like I've noticed with food, right? Like it's had to scale back, and success has had to look different, and I've had to show a whole lot of forgiveness and compassion in myself to be like, no, the best option is like ease right now. It might be grabbing something out of the freezer if I've got something, but it also might be getting takeaway or just deciding on a Friday that, you know what, we just need to go to the pub because for my headspace, I just need to like chill and the kids need to get out. And so that in myself has been my personal journey, but also like for our athletes, if we're thinking about when sometimes they train, it's like might be early morning and then they might be working full time. They might be training of a morning and then having to be a mum.
Yeah.
Like there's just so many things that we have this big expectation of like we need these female players to show up. They need to be high performing. They need to be well recovered and they need to be resilient. It's like, man, we're asking a lot of these girls, and there is not that much support to show up in that of what we're expecting. And so, a really key part of what I do is not educating on the nutrition science bit, but actually going, what is actually in your capacity to do and scaling it back. So, for an example, setting up the environment to be easier for yourself is okay. So it might be as simple as going, you know what, I'm just going to do the microwave rice pouches instead of cooking rice. Like really simple things like that just ease your load a little bit and enable someone to build something out of nothing really quickly. But it might also, you know, meal prep can look different for everyone. It might be just on a Sunday, we're writing out what we're going to have for the week and then making sure it's in our house. Like it could literally just be a list of meals, but it could also be, I'm just going to make sure that like I've got a few snacks to grab on my way out the door to training or for recovery after training, and the rest I'll deal with. So I think just giving ourselves permission to not feel like we have to have these perfect glass containers stacked in our fridge for a whole week of meals, it that's great if you can do it, but also acknowledging that not everyone has that capacity, and that I'm not talking just physical capacity, I'm talking about mental capacity, because sometimes the Sunday or Monday is the only day
Mm.
off,
Yeah,
you know? And so sometimes you don't want to be in the kitchen for 2 hours
that's
and then
right.
getting up for another one. So I think that's a really key part of like just that appreciation that you can eat for performance on a budget, but you can also eat for performance without it having to look perfect
Yeah.
or the healthiest option. And there's ways to like, if you're looking at the foundation there, it's like, you know what, number one, all I care about is you're eating regularly and enough.
Mm.
There's this beautiful framework that we use. It was designed by a Queensland dietitian, and it's called the RAVES framework. And the RAVES framework is basically regularity, adequacy, variety, eating socially, and spontaneity.
Mm.
Now, the
Okay.
reason it exists is because we look at this order to help someone recover from disordered eating. So it might be going, you know what, our first step is just getting you eating regularly. Then we'll make sure you're eating enough. Then we'll add in some variety. Then we'll look for that spontaneity, you know, social eating. But what you also might notice is that often when we're moving into more maladaptive disordered eating, it goes the other way, where often the first thing we lose is that spontaneity. We might find eating socially really stressful. Then we might cut out some variety and start cutting out food groups or types of foods and carbs and those types of things. And then we lose adequacy and we might start skipping meals into that regularity. So I always come back to that even in the overall piece of how we approach nutrition. And it's like, what's my bare minimum? You know, if I've got no capacity, no time, how can I first of all just make sure I'm eating enough? Because that's where the evidence is at. Like that is where we see so much benefit. And then how do I make sure I'm getting enough protein and carbs and color after that? So just like, you know, making sure we're focusing on what we can add in rather than always what we've got to remove or shouldn't have or couldn't have.
Mm. And how do you know if you are eating enough?
Mm. There's a few really beautiful reflective questions that I often have landed on, and it's also how we screen our players both acutely and really, you know, quite regularly, because it can change really quickly based around training load, but also what someone's going through. Um, in a clinical sense, for the female athlete, you may see a change in your menstrual cycle. So I think that's probably the most well-known symptom of REDS or relative energy deficiency in sport, where you might see a pause in your menstrual cycle that's over 2 to 3 months, and that's called secondary amenorrhea or hypothalamic amenorrhea. In the other piece to that is primary amenorrhea, where you don't get your period after the age of 15. So you're 15, 16 years old, and you haven't had a period yet. That is also considered a concern, particularly if you're a very active individual. And so that's one piece of like very obvious. The other areas of that is things like bone stress reactions and fractures. Those who are underfueled or not eating enough are at 10 times higher risk of getting a bone stress injury. So just keeping that in mind, because the bone is an active tissue, it is always getting pulled down and built back up. And so if we're not eating enough, we have this disruption in our hormones that are so key to building bone, and we can get low bone density even at a young age. So that's another key part clinically that we look out for and we screen for. But subjectively, that's also where the magic happens. And often, don't know what my word just did then. Often what we see before we see any interruptions in things like injury or menstrual cycle. So things that you might do is like, I've noticed that I'm sick more often than I usually would be, or when I get sick, it's more severe than it usually would be, particularly around like, compared to my peers or my teammates. I've noticed that I'm getting injured more often. More niggles, more soft tissue injury, bony stress injury, that kind of thing. Or even things like I've noticed I'm more irritable or short-tempered around my loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
We often say that our family members know before we do that we're under eating.
Bit hangry, yep.
Yeah, a bit hangry. I actually added that to my wedding vows, Kylie.
Do you? For better or worse.
Yeah, for better or worse. I promise to eat before I yell at you.
Yeah.
The other bit to that is a depression in mood and also change in things like sleep and fatigue. So I've noticed that I'm more tired or more fatigued than what I would expect for how much I'm doing is a really nice little reflector. And the other bit to that is also in training. So both in strength, but also, on pitch or track or whatever your sport may be. So, I notice that I'm not making the progress that I would expect for how much work I'm doing. So
Yeah.
you might feel like that's plateaued. You might feel like it's declined. You're not seeing the power outputs or the numbers that you would expect for how much work you're putting in. So obviously, if you're not training, that's a useless one. But I like the, for how much I'm doing, I would expect to have been progressing. So those are the types of nice little questions that I often pop in. And it's just an invitation to be aware. And I think also the big thing to that is it means that the athletes that I'm working with are really aware to reach out before I do.
Yeah.
Like, I've noticed they've done this, or I've noticed that has happened. And when we're looking at underfueling, it's not as simple as going, well, just eat more. It's like, well, no, there's like a few key reasons why someone might be underfueled. And that could be completely accidental, like we've talked about. Like they can't afford it. They may not have a really great nutrition knowledge where they realize how much food they have, or they don't feel permission to eat enough. But it also might be the environment or just how much training they're doing. They don't have time to eat around all their training sessions. So there's lots there. Or they might be working full time plus training and having kids. So there's lots of different reasons there. But also on top of that, it might be intentional. They might be looking to lose weight or change their body composition. Or it might be related to their relationship with food, or that relationship with food and body that's leading to some restriction or behavior around food that isn't allowing them to eat the foods or the amount of foods they need to perform or recover. So have you gone through with your listeners what REDS is?
Yes. Yeah. We had Emily Meehan
I
on.
feel like I missed it. Yes, I feel like I missed a step in this conversation. I'll make sure that they're all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So refer back to that episode. Emily is such a gem. So that I can't wait to listen to that one.
Yeah, brilliant. I always say that I won the lottery once I have a personal chef and a personal masseuse. You can keep your Ferraris if I had those two things. Oh, bring it on.
So good. Yeah, they're absolutely the two busiest in our camps often too.
Yeah, I bet. If you notice someone in your team or a friend or someone who might be showing symptoms of disordered eating or an eating disorder, what is the best way to handle that? Because obviously, sometimes if you call it out, it might bring up shame, guilt, and you've got to be really sensitive around it. So is it best to have a conversation with them, have a conversation with the coach, or what do you find is the most effective method?
I think the first step in this is considering what your relationship with that person is. Is it a relationship where that conversation would be appropriate? and safe and confident and comfortable, sorry. And if it's not, then you can absolutely still flag it with someone who is a safe person in that environment, to then be able to act on. The other piece to that is acknowledging that you don't have to be the solution just because you've noticed. I think sometimes we hold back thinking, well, if I bring something up, I first of all might make it worse, or second of all might have absolutely misread this situation, but also third, I don't know what to do after. However, I think a really big thing in disordered eating and eating disorder is this not enoughness of like, well, I'm not sick enough yet, or it's not severe enough yet, or I don't look like I'm sick enough. And that also happens to us who's maybe watching this happen of like, well, they look fine. Maybe it's just, a phase, or maybe they're going through a hard time. But I think one big reminder is that you're never going to make it worse by bringing it up. And just the way that you bring it up is important, though, where it doesn't need to sit in blame or even judgment, of course. Like, it needs to sit in, I care about you, and I've noticed that this has been hard, or I've noticed that this has changed for you. Is there something going on that you're willing to talk about, or is this something that we can, maybe have a chat about later? So it's just that invitation of going, I see you, I have noticed, and I'm here. And then the next step, ideally in something like disordered eating disorders, is if there is a concern, we then lead them through a pathway of support. So the support ideally is three-pronged in medical, but also psychology and nutrition. So it's a collaborative approach to ensure that we're kind of hitting all targets for the nutrition intake, but also medical stability, and appreciating the really big psychology element that is held around body image and relationship with food.
Yeah, it's a prolific one, and we can all be a testament that we know someone or we've seen someone alter their behaviors. And the problem is that once you have an eating disorder or disordered eating, it's very hard to essentially come back from that, isn't it? And you always will have a slightly more high risk of developing another one in the future. So it's something that we need to call out a lot earlier. And it's something I think that in clubs we need to be more aware of, so we know the signs and symptoms, but B, have support networks and have sort of methods and processes in place that we can call it out. And if they're not comfortable talking to that person, you know who the best person is to go to, whether that's a wellbeing manager, whether that is a coach or someone, so it doesn't fall through the cracks, because they are really, really high numbers, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think that's a really big thing of like, we also have a preventative piece to this where we don't want to wait for a problem to exist that we need to fix. We actually want to create a culture in our homes, in our workplaces, which can be, in our workplaces as clubs or sporting entities, where there is a safety in the language being used around food and body, where we appreciate that even well-intentioned comments around someone's body change can be quite detrimental, whereas it can also be the other way as well. So I think if we think about and even just notice, hey, have I made a comment about what someone looks like before? Most of us would say absolutely yes. Could I have said something different there, or how can I be different? And I think that can be an uncomfortable piece for us as a society, where it's so normalized to comment on what someone looks like. So how do we flip that script, and how do we flip that language to be more around how is that person showing up and who are they, rather than what they're looking like? All the different comments I've heard over the years around, comments around food, what's on someone's plate, how their body has changed over time, they can be really, really horrible and sit with someone for a really long time. And I think the really big piece in body composition monitoring, weight monitoring, but also how we talk around food and language is we can't predict when this will become a problem for someone. And so we need to show up with safety, not fear, but safety and consent in all of these types of things to enable an environment that's preventative rather than just reactive. And that's where everyone listening can be a part of that, whether you are an athlete, a family member, parent, but also someone in the support system of sport. We can all show up with an appreciation that everyone has a relationship with food that might sit differently, and that it can change over time. And because it's a continuum, if we all are aware of the clues along the way, no one goes from optimized green kind of eating to red. it can happen very quickly, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so if we're all aware of those amber kind of symptoms where you might notice change in someone's food decisions, food behaviors, or how they're eating at a table or socially, we can pick it up way earlier and prevent it getting from eating disorder. Because turning it around from disordered eating in that amber point to back to green is much easier than waiting for it to become red. And I think that's where the key piece is we don't want to wait. We don't want to make it so that we're all kind of just dancing around this conversation. We want to normalize the conversation, but we don't want to normalize disordered eating and eating disorder as something that's, oh, well, it's common, so it's something we can accept. And that's where that prevention piece has to be part of the culture of the club, but also the sporting organisation that a person is spending so much of their life within.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a systemic issue, and it's going to take everyone to step up into that role just so, yeah, we can reduce those stats, because they're pretty horrific when you think about it, and they affect a lot of people. And that's what we say. It doesn't affect you just in sport. It will affect you in your whole life. So it's something that needs to be knocked on the head as soon as possible.
It keeps people, and I think that's the thing that's probably not measured in this, is like how much dropout or churn have we got of our athletes because of these underlying issues or the pressure that they're feeling that aren't actually related to the performance side at all, but they've consumed so much of someone's energy or well-being that they need to exit. Or they've created so much harm that it's then led to a really, preventable injury. So I think that's the piece too that we need to sell. It's like, it's not just about the disordered eating disorder side, it's the symptoms as like an awareness of that, of what the actual impact is and how big that may be. But that's going to come from a whole lot of cultural shift of appreciating that. I think culturally, both in men's and women's sport, we put an overemphasis of what body composition is or should be. And we need to place more on well-being, enabling performance.
Absolutely. Now, I want to finish up with one question.
Oh,
We're going to
God.
finish on a more positive note. What is exciting you in women's sport at the moment, whether that is a player, an event, a movement, anything?
Oh, my goodness. First of all, just need to just shout out to women's sport because, like, even if I think about, like, the last 10 years of my career, it wasn't even a career path 10 years ago to be in women's sport. Like, how phenomenal that we now have this shift where women's sport can be a place where we can obviously be centered and have, like, an incredible array of athletes, but also support staff are wanting to be there and able to be there financially as a role in a career. Like, amazing. What is exciting me most is I have to give a shout out to the Asian Cup that is coming up in March. It's here in Australia. I'm hoping for crowds similar to World Cup. It is situated in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Perth. So all of those games are now for sale if you are keen to come along. So that is definitely what is taking up a whole lot of space in a really great way of building up to the Asian Cup for the Matildas.
I can't wait. I'll be there with my little shirt on. Yay.
So good. I know. What jersey have you got? Have you got old school or have you gone the new bright one?
No, I've got old school. I do have to invest in a new bright one. I'll get fully kitted out.
Yeah, so good. So exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today. And I think, the key takeaway here is that there is so much more to food than the science behind it. It's deeply behavioral, it's deeply psychological, and all of these factors need to be taken into consideration so that we can look after an athlete in a more holistic view and that they are having a healthier relationship with food beyond the sporting field in itself. So to all listeners out there who did get a bit of value from today, and I'm sure everyone did, please send it on to a female athlete or their support network who needs to hear it. Be sure to follow Compete Performance on socials. And Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. And I already look forward to the next episode because I still think we have so much more to discuss.
I'm only just ticking off in my head now of like, oh, but we didn't cover this, but I need to talk about this. Amazing. That time went so fast, Kylie. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out. I am an open book and love those conversations with female athletes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.